Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. And this is our place where writers like to gather. We talk about all things writing, about writing, and for writers, and by writers. So it's such a great community here, and we're so glad to see some people in our chat. And thank you if you're watching the replay. We really appreciate you watching that, taking the time to do that later. My name's Jean Wise. I'm one of the co-hosts here. I'm joined today by Bethany Chet and Jan Martin, who are going to help us stay online, and Johnny, who's behind the scenes, and Melissa, who's always behind the scenes for us, too. So we really appreciate them monitoring the chat for us, too. And we have a special guest today that we are excited about. And so I'm going to turn it over to Bethany to introduce her and start our discussion today. So welcome, everybody.
Yes, and welcome, Wendy. We're so glad to have you here with us. And I am honored, really, to do an introduction. So I want to make sure everyone understands just the level of professionalism we have here, and especially in children's nonfiction with Wendy. And she has been published, she's multi-published. She is a former elementary school, science teacher, class certified speaker, and she writes both fiction and nonfiction, as well as articles and devotionals for adults too. So again, we're seeing an accomplished author who crosses into different genres and age groups, which is something we talk about a lot here. And I did want to go ahead and read a list of places where she's been published, just because it's pretty impressive. So Wendy's writing credits include titles for Focus Readers, State Standards Publishing, ABDO Publishing, Learner Books, Kid Haven Press, Lucent Books, and Capstone Press. And then as well, she's been published with Highlights for Children and Clubhouse Magazine. And then she's also one of our Serious Writer Academy instructors. And she has, I'll put the link in the chat, and I'll say here, her site is seriouswriteracademy.com. Wendy Hinote Lanier. I'll put that in the chat. And she has multiple classes on writing nonfiction for kids, research for nonfiction, which I think is just fascinating, and really writing for the educational market, which we're seeing pop up, all these imprints for children popping up, especially in nonfiction. So I know that most of you in the chat are excited to learn from Wendy. I'm excited that she's here.
Oh my goodness.
So that's another thing, little fun fact. And so Wendy, welcome, and I guess let's just jump into how you got started writing for children, and then I know we're going to have questions and things, tips on how to write for kids, and the research. I think we're all very fascinated to learn from you. So welcome.
Oh, well, thank you. That's quite an introduction. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yay! All right, and Annette just popped in. As much as I researched, I'm very excited to hear from you, and you've got multiple classes on writing for kids. So I guess maybe let's just start there. Like, what got you into writing for children? And then maybe let's just start talking about some tips on how to actually capture a voice for kids, and then maybe talk about some research and things like that. And we'll be monitoring the chat over here.
Okay. Well, I actually started writing when I was in about the 3rd grade. I had a spiral notebook. I kept my thing. I wrote stories and poems, and I was an avid reader as a kid. My mom fought television as long as she possibly could. And we didn't have one until I was in the 5th grade. And so at our house, if you wanted to occupy your time, if you weren't outside playing, then you were reading. And so I grew up on the Happy Hollisters, and I read, I had a library card to all of the libraries in my area. At that time, nobody charged you for a library card. So I grew up in a little town called Port Neches, Texas. I had a Port Neches library card. I had a Nederland library card. I had a Port Arthur library card, and I had a Beaumont. There were 2 libraries in Beaumont, and I think I had one of them is now a research library, so I don't know if I had a card to that, but I had cards to all the area libraries, and that's what we did. We read. So I wrote in high school. We had a literary magazine. Not a lot of high schools have those, but we actually had a literary magazine that was poems and stories and things and artwork that was produced by the students. And I'm pretty sure the school took a big hit on it every year. It cost them a lot more to print than we sold it for. But I was fortunate to be involved with that for 3 years. And then I got to college and I started teaching. And if you've ever taught school, that that's a 24-hour-a-day job almost. And so it kind of took a backseat for a long time. I did write for my kids occasionally, but I didn't write for a long time. And somewhere around the year 2000, my high school was having a high school reunion, 20th century reunion. And I'm sitting in the bleachers with my buddy and that I grew up with a couple of doors down. And she said, "What happened to the writing?" And I thought, yeah, what happened to the writing? And so I really started to think about, doing that more seriously. And through a series of events, I went back to writing, trying to do that full time somewhere around 2001. And here we are. I think my first publication was somewhere around 2005, 4 or 5, somewhere in there.
Wow. I love hearing the writing journey, other writers' journeys like that. And that is what a neat thing at that reunion to have somebody kind of say, "Hey, what happened?" Wow.
It gave me that kick in the pants. Yeah.
Yeah, that is amazing. Where was your first publication? Just curious. In 2005. What was your first book?
I did a book for Lucent Books, which at that point was part of Thompson Gale. It was part, it's an educational press, and I did a book called Life Cycles, and it came out in 2005, maybe early 2006, but I probably got it written somewhere around 2004, early 2005. In fact, I remember the galleys came in the fall, and we had to evacuate for a hurricane, and I was actually at my parents' house, and the editor was calling frantically trying to find me, and she found, they sent the galleys, they came back because UPS said we can't deliver this area. And so finally I got the galleys, and that's when they were actually, you had them in your hand. I know that it's not that long ago, but that there's been a lot of changes in publishing since then. And I had the galleys, and then I sat on the front porch of my mom and dad's house where I'm living now again. And we went through them literally page by page and discussed things. But there were some issues with working around the storm to get the final product in. So I guess the book actually came out in 2006.
That is wild. I think Jan lives in Florida, so she can identify with the hurricane. You guys in Texas, Florida.
You gotta run.
And tech issues, anytime you have tech issues now, so that always disturbs it. Well, let's talk a little bit about nonfiction writing for kids. Maybe some tips on how to get started, why it's good. What would you advise on that?
First of all, nonfiction has actually a larger audience than fiction.
Wow.
You have a better chance of selling nonfiction at this stage right now than you do fiction. And if you think about it from a teacher's perspective, I can tell you that the books that get read in any classroom are going to be the nonfiction books. And if you really think about it, fiction is very abstract. There are things, a child has to have the ability to think abstractly in order to enjoy fiction. And they don't go straight to that. Mm-hmm. They have to be able to, but nonfiction is much more concrete. And that's why even struggling readers enjoy nonfiction, because they're learning things. It's about something that is tangible. It's just easier for them. And good nonfiction had a bad rap for a long time, and it got it just seems like a lot of people aren't interested in it. And but I really think you have a better chance of getting published in nonfiction at this point in the publishing industry than you do fiction.
Well, how do you figure out what topics that are needed or trending or anything like that in the area of children's nonfiction?
Well, if it interests you, It might, I'm not going to say if it interests you, it will interest children, no. But I think partly my perspective as a science teacher, I know what kids say, wow, oh, that's cool, and things like that. But if your kids, your grandkids, your neighbor's kid, what are they interested in? I think I'll just say this. I think one of the worst pieces of advice that writers get is write what you know. And you hear that all the time. Mm-hmm. Right? If I write what I know, then I'm not going to write much. We don't all know, but we all have the ability to find out. We have the ability to do some research, to find out things, to learn things. And if you're learning things and they're interesting and new and you like it, then there's a good chance a kid's going to enjoy that too. Biographies are always interesting, especially if it's someone that maybe isn't well known. But I have Pat Miller is a writing buddy of mine in my critique group and a member of the Nonfiction Ninjas. And Pat was on a vacation and they passed this thing and the guide said, oh yeah, and the guy who invented donuts is buried over there in that cemetery. Pat thought, who invented donuts? And so she went home and started doing research, and as a result, she published an award-winning book about the man who invented donuts. And I wish I could tell you the topic right off the top of my head. I think Donut Man.
Oh my!
Well, but the author's Pat Miller.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very interesting book.
That is fascinating. Just curious, you dropped something there. You said Nonfiction Ninjas. What's that?
The Nonfiction Ninjas are a group of 11 writers from all across the country. Some you may be familiar with and some you're not. Michelle Medlock Adams is one of the ninjas.
Yeah.
But we formed a group about a year and a half ago, and it's essentially, for us, it is a critique group. I can't say enough about finding that right critique group. Mm-hmm. I didn't have one for a long time. They're not, as far as I'm concerned, they're not easy to find. When you're a beginner, it's not such a hard thing, but as you progress in your writing career, having that feedback from from someone who is at your level and above is super important. And so that's what I have found in that group. We meet once a year and we meet monthly like this in a Zoom meeting. So it's a very important group for me. But among those are Peggy Thomas is the lady who wrote, she and her mother wrote the definitive nonfiction book on nonfiction for children, writing nonfiction for children. I have it somewhere in all the boxes, and I'm in the middle of a move and I'm living in my parents' attic. And so
oh no.
That's what my husband tells people. It's really quite upstairs here, but that's essentially what it is. But and everything I have is in boxes and not organized at the moment. So
I have that, but a couple people, and this might be in a book, resource book like that, a couple people in the chat asked that how do they learn the exact specs for length of books and good word choices for writing for kids at these different ages, and how do they even start if they have an idea, or if they got it? How do they find you?
Well, first of all, I just turned in my blog post for this week if you go to nonfictionninjas.com, I just turned in a blog post in which I review the categories of children's books and the approximate word lengths that are appropriate for all of those books. Okay, I just turned that in. I am also one of those people who's an absent-minded professor. So if you ask me what I wrote yesterday, I can't tell you, not really. But I also will tell you that you need a resource called a Children's Writer's Word Book. Now, that's if trying to write to a specific grade level. And that's only a huge deal if you were writing for an educational publisher. If you're just writing a nonfiction, be aware of your audience and be aware of the word choices. And you might want, you're not going to want to use the word succinct in a picture book, for example. That's not a word that little kids are going to understand. So you want to keep the vocabulary in the general area of the group you're aiming for, but you don't have to check every word. On the other hand, when you write for an educational publisher and you are shooting for a certain ATOS, ATOS score, you really, when I'm writing those kinds of books, I have that children's writer's word book in my hand, and I am checking words. What grade level is this word? What grade level is that word? But that resource is a really good resource. Now, it doesn't have everything in it, and the other thing you can check are, there are lists out there, grade level word lists. In fact, your state may have them listed in their state curriculum under you can go to your state's educational website and see if they have them, or you can just Google word lists, grade word lists, that sort of thing. And there are author helps out there that may have some of that kind of stuff as well. Most of the ones I've run across are for adults, but there may be some more. At this point in time, the only word book I found is that, and it's in its second edition, is the Children's Writers Word Book.
Okay. And I think Jan mentioned that too. Jan, do you want to hop on a minute and tell us how you use that book?
Yeah, I use that book all the time. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I write my manuscript, and then when I go back to reread through it, if a word kind of pops out to me that I'm not sure it's the right age level, then I can look up the word, and it tells me all the different age levels, different words I can use if it's too high of a word, or maybe too low. Sometimes, and there are times when I've stuck words that were higher grade levels, but then I put something along with it to help explain it so that it helps them stretch and grow.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. That is great. Well, talk a little bit about the process. Let's say I discovered this donut man. Let's use that as the illustration. I'm on a trip and I hear something about the donut man and I think, what is the process? Maybe jump into researching first. How would you go about researching that? And then how do you go back knowing how to, not so much how to format it, but who you're going to target? What age group you're going to target, because that would decide how you're going to write the book. I guess it's kind of in that order. Maybe I got them out of order. What do you suggest, Wendy?
Well, it depends on what you want to write. Now, I'm probably not going to do middle grade and above. I don't, the stuff that sells in that market, I'm not interested in writing. I just, it's in today's published world, or middle grade and up is full of angst and horrible family life and all the stuff that I don't write that. If it's not, I always say about movies, if you're not going to make me laugh, I'm not going to bother to pay to go. I don't enjoy being me personally, and that is a personal thing. So my writing is going to probably be in the picture book to early reader and beginning chapter book sort of range. That would be where I am. So if I'm going to choose a topic, I'm going to want to write for one of those audiences. Now, I have another friend in the Ninja group. She is of Chinese descent. She wrote At Home in Her Tomb. Her name is Christine. Oh gosh, don't you hate it when you go blank like this? Christine Lou Perkins. Her book is definitely middle grade. It's about a mummy that they found in China, and it's almost scholarly, but it's a middle grade and up type thing, and it's all about the mummy and what they found with it and all those kinds of things. Obviously, you're not going to write a very detailed book about mummies for preschool, probably. That topic doesn't lend itself to that. So I think you have to consider A, your topic, and B, your own interest in what level you want to write for. There are books that I still have on my list that, my to-do list that I'd like to write that if doing research, they will be nonfiction, but they will probably be picture book, possibly beginning chapter book, that sort of thing. So I think part of it is what you want to write, and then part of it, the topic will tell you. It just depends on the subject sometimes.
Okay. Then how would you go about researching the donut man, or whatever,
Well, I probably wouldn't do as. I probably would not do as good a job as Pat. Researching, you either love it or you hate it. Usually. And
I love the rabbit trails that you can go down.
Okay, well, that is yeah. And Pat did the rabbit trails with that book. She found out all kinds of stuff she didn't need to know in order to write that book at that level. But I have a tendency to think of research as finding stuff out. What do you need to know? Just finding some stuff out. If research intimidates you, then don't think of it as research. Just think of it as finding answers to the questions that you may already have. Well, who did invent the donut? Who was he? So you start with, are there any records on this guy? And I always, if you want to get really down to brass tacks, I start with a Google search. What's out there?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good place to start. I hate to say that. You can't use the research you find on Wikipedia. It's not considered a reliable source. However, at the bottom, you will find that most of those articles are sourced, and at the bottom, you will find some reliable sources. If you look at the article, then look at what they cited at the bottom as their source of information, and you may find some places there. So starting with Wikipedia, you're not going to use that as one of your sources, but it's not a bad place to start because it gives you an overview, and it also gives you some places that you might find additional information. I always recommend getting to know a good research librarian. Ooh. Make friends with your research librarian. I have a book that I haven't been able to sell because of the topic. It's about the orphan movement. And right now we're in a point in our history where we are not discussing history that offends anybody. So that book is a hard sell right now. But I wrote this book because my husband a lecture in the town where we lived previously, and I somehow got to be a middle-aged lady without ever knowing about the orphan trains.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened, but when I heard about it, I was like, is there anything out there for kids about this? This is information. Well, there were a couple of books. There was a middle grade, and I found Eve Bunting had written a picture book a few years ago. So I found a couple of things, but I thought it was about time, and I wanted to give it that Texas spin. So in doing some research, I found a man who was brought to Texas and wound up living the rest of his life in Texas. And some of those stories did not end well, but his did. He had a very good life in Texas. And I thought having a good story would be a great way to approach that particular topic. So, but the whole point, one of the things, the gentleman had written an article for Guidepost magazine a long time ago. And I was trying to get my hands on the actual publication date of that magazine. They had the article on an orphan train website, but I couldn't verify where it came from. They said it came from Guidepost, but I couldn't verify that. And I couldn't find the article and couldn't get into Guidepost. And so finally, I called up my 7th grade English teacher who's now a librarian, and I said, help, I need to. And within a week, she had, and I have a physical copy of that particular Guidepost now. Research librarians are good people to know. So I recommend they can help you find things, help you get into WorldCat and some of these online databases that you don't have access to by yourself. You have to have universities are usually members. If you have if you're an alumni of a university, you can go to usually you have some kind of they will let you use their resources in their library if you're an alumnus. So it's a good way to start. So,
and it sounds like to me we need to continually develop our skills of curiosity and paying attention as writers, no matter what genre we're writing for, you know, but how important that is, especially in the example that you're giving.
Well, even if you write fiction, if you don't ever plan to write for children, think about this. Even in fiction, you have to do some research because you need background and you need to get authentic, all those things. That information that you looked up that you were going to put in your fiction novel or whatever can be used to write an article for highlights, or it can be used to write an article for, any children's magazine. You can use that information in multiple ways. So make it work double time for you. Yeah, it goes in your novel or it goes in your middle grade or whatever, but take that nonfiction information that you researched and use it to write an article that you can sell to highlights or Book Life or somebody else, because those things pay pretty well.
Yeah. Do you have any tips then at this point? Let's say we have the idea and we're starting to do the research. Should it go to more a publication versus a book, like in the school, or do you have a tip how you would decide that at the time?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question. How would we use the nonfiction, the research that we're doing for, I'm sorry,
how would you as a writer decide which direction to go, as an article, let's say for highlights, or a magazine, or to put it as a book proposal for more of a publication as a book? How do you decide that at the time?
That's a good question, because I had a conversation with Nancy Sanders the other day about some of us tend to think in terms of books, and some of us tend to think in terms of articles. I mean, that we just do. And I tend to think in terms of books. Now, even in a nonfiction book, you still want the type of nonfiction that's selling right now, you still need a story arc. You still need that inciting incident. You still the traditional storyline, you're just using things that really happened. An article, not so much. And it may be that you don't have enough to create that traditional storyline. That's when you know you have an article. Okay. When you're really just presenting information, it may be that article instead of the book.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Go ahead. What did you say, Bethany?
Well, I just think that's such an interesting way to even narrow down the purpose of that piece and really looking at it for what it is and being able to decide I'm going to go further. I was going to ask too, to add on to that, some of these books, if you think, okay, this is going to be a full-fledged book, you could probably pull several articles out of that. I know for adults, but I think that it might be for children too.
Actually, yes. I'd make it, Michelle is big on that.
Yes.
Make it work for you, and that's true. You have, if you're doing a project, there is no rule that says all of it has to apply to this one thing, and then you're done with that and you can't ever do that again. You may have a big thick folder of information stuff, and you may write several articles out of that. You may write a picture book out of that, and you can even turn that into a middle grade or a chapter book. All of those things can be done with the information. Just how you choose to look at it. It's up to you.
Yeah, that is great. Well, I'm curious. If I got this big folder, I've done some of my research and I've worked with some different people and stuff, how the heck do you organize that or keep it straight? And what does the publisher want? I'm familiar, of course, with adult nonfiction, and I know a lot of times you have to keep track of all that. Is that the same requirement for children's nonfiction, or what?
It absolutely is if you're writing for the educational market, because if you're writing for the educational market, when you turn in a manuscript, you actually noted manuscript. And I recommend that you do that no matter who you're writing for. If you have nonfiction elements in that then I recommend you footnote your manuscript so that you will be able, even if you don't have to turn in a footnoted copy, you can take them out for the final copy and turn that in. But for the copy that you keep, if you have that footnoted, then when an editor comes back to you and says, how do you know the guy is buried in a cemetery on the river in Boston? You can say, it's, you can pull that up without having to go find it again, because even if it's just in your physical folder, that can be, in my case, that folder might be in a box in a storage unit at the back of the storage unit, and there is no way I can access that anytime in the next 6 months. You see what
Mm-hmm.
So if you copy, then your footnoted copy shows exactly where you found that information. It will make your life so much easier, I promise.
That's a great tip we can use in anything that we write.
Yes.
Make a footnoted copy for ourselves.
Yes, and I can make your footnoting process
Wendy,
Wendy,
could you start over again? Can you start over with your thought again? Your screen freezed a little bit, so we lost you there.
Yeah, well, I'm in the country, so I apologize. I'm actually working on a hotspot. So, yeah. All right. As in terms of your footnoting, let me make your life a little bit easier there. There are multiple citation generators online. And most of them are free. The one I use is called SiteFast, CITEFAST. I highly recommend it because it's free. You sign up, and they act an account for you. And if I were to go to my SiteFast account right now, and I have probably the last 20 books I've written I've generated a bibliography using that thing. What I do is, as I'm searching online, if I find a book, if I find an article, whatever I find, if I think I might use it, I immediately create a footnote or a citation for it in my bibliography generator there, in that citation generator. And so then when I actually start writing, that SiteFast is put up on my computer, and I say, oh yeah, I found this in something, and I found this here. I go over and I copy and paste the citation that's already on my SiteFast account and put it in my document right then and there. I don't have to figure out how to write it because it's already in the right format. I don't have to remember it. All I have to do is go over to my SiteFast account, pull up that particular bibliography, highlight and paste the entry I want, and then put it in my document.
Okay, Jan put the login there, and the site is SiteFast. Right? .net. Is that it?
I thought it was CITE.
Okay.
I think it's
One of you guys look for that to see which way it is. And somebody asked, is it the same as EasyBib? Are you familiar?
It's very, very similar. It's similar.
Okay.
I happen to have settled on that one. I find it very easy to use. There are others. The thing I like about SiteFast is that books I wrote 8 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, I still have those bibliographies in that archive there. They don't ditch it. I don't have to recreate it, and I don't have to keep a physical copy of it. They have it.
Okay, it's got listed SiteFast.com. A lot of times we do copy the chat, so if you're watching this on replay, look for that copy too, because we put a lot of the different links in from that's been in the chat, and it should be connected to this when we put this up, like on YouTube, and you watch it later on our site. But we cited the SiteFast. That is I'm going to use that for umpteen things. You can use that even in fiction, like you said.
Oh, you can use it. Yes. In fact, the first time the ninjas met was April a year ago. And one of the ladies actually just about broke down into tears. That was such a big help. And I'll be honest, we laugh because I say I'm a lazy writer and I'm always looking for shortcuts. I'm always looking for ways to make it less intimidating for me. And I have found that to be very useful. There is another program on you talk about organization. I keep a folder on my computer, and I actually keep a physical folder as well. So for every book, there is a folder on my computer, and then that has contracts, and it has any correspondence. It has several things in it. But then I also have a physical folder where I have printed out articles and things like that, so I can write on them and highlight and things like that. I have a physical folder, but there is about this, but on Word there's brain fart. There's a component of Word that allows you to save articles. It allows you to save audio files, video files, and I understand it's searchable keywords. And if that's the case, that would make this so much easier. If you keep all of and then you can put it in folders within a folder. So that helps you organize. Okay, here are all my audio files. Here are all my video files. Here are all of the articles I found. Here are the books. Here's the article I wanted to keep out of, and it allows you to save things. OneNote. Does that sound right, Bethany?
OneNote?
Yeah, I know a lot of people do like OneNote a lot, especially because it is part of that Microsoft thing. I think their competitor is Evernote. I'm not so sure, but I tend to use Evernote, but I know people who love OneNote, and it's the same thing. Like,
you're an Apple person, aren't you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, for the rest of the world, I have not fully explored that OneNote yet, and I keep thinking that on my next project, that's what I'm going to start doing, is I'm going to learn how to organize things and keep them in those types of things. I like the idea of it being searchable, because it's like, you're writing and you had this just a tidbit of information, and you remembered that you found it, but now you can't find it again, and you can't find it in your physical folder, and you can't find it in your the folder online. You can't find it. So if it was searchable, that would make life easier too. So that's one of those things that when I get moved and settled and that sort of thing, that's one of the things that's on my list to learn to do.
Your next project and stuff. When you use something like EasyBib or SiteFast, Dory asked the question, does it help you format unusual types of source of information? Her example is her brother's a race car driver, a TV personality. That's interesting. We'll have to ask Dory about that one. And he's going to be her guest to the race in August. I will be documenting it and writing something based on the experience there. So when you have some of these unusual resources, does those sites help you?
Yeah, I believe. Yes, I believe that if you look on, first of all, it's very simple in that it's step 1, step 2, step 3. It actually has it on the screen. And step 1 is you choose the source of the information, and I believe interview is one of them.
Okay.
Magazine, website, book, and then it lists. And then I think there's a drop-down menu for some additional, as you say, unusual or less common sources.
So it would give you the guidelines for a variety of places.
The great thing about it is you don't even have to look at guidelines. It just puts it, all you put is they ask you for the information and you just put it in. Sometimes if it's a book or something that's very, I guess, I don't want to say well-known, but something like that, you just type in the title, all the information pops up there. Literally all you have to do is click Save Citation. Wow. Sometimes I have to look a little to find the publication date, like especially for websites. I have to look around a little, see if I can find the publication date or the last date that it was amended. And then also sometimes I have to look a little bit to find who was the author of that particular article or of that web page or whatever. So I do have to finagle it a little bit. Sometimes they'll pop up all the information that they can then derive electronically. And they have to fill in a couple of spots, but I don't have to actually format the actual citation. All I have to do is put in the information, and it over on the right, it actually is creating in the correct format, and you get to choose. Are you using Chicago, You using, what form do you want to use, and it will do it correctly.
Wow. That is that's the tip of the day, I think.
I think so, pretty much.
Priceless tips today. This is just.
I tell people I don't know a whole lot, but when I share that one, I kind of earn my keep there.
Wow, that is. So I think we'll all use that from now on. So let's say, as a writer, I've got my idea. I've decided to make it. I think it's got enough for a book. I've done a lot. How do I know when I've done enough research?
I think it's when you've answered your questions. Now, I heard you say earlier you like to research.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do. And what happens is they get caught on the rabbit trails, and it's interesting, and they can go on and on and on, and they will research forever. I'm not that kind of person. I really am one of those people. I want to know this, and I look until I find that, and then I'm done. I move on. Now, that means that, I guess that's because I won't say I'm not interested in the process. I am, but I have a tendency to be able to say, okay, I have found the answers I need. That doesn't mean I won't go back later, though. A lot of times what happens for me is I find there are more questions. As more questions come up, then I have to go back to that research trail and see if I can find the answers to those questions. So I always tell people research is finding out stuff. You're looking, answering your questions. And when you have answered the questions that you feel you will need to answer, then you get started. But that doesn't mean that other questions won't arise, and you may need to go back and do additional research. This is kind of an ongoing process in my mind.
Wow. Yeah, and I think, at least that I've done in my own research, I have a tendency to get so much. Okay, now I'm way in overload. What did I want to know? And I go back to the first question, and that helps me sort it out.
Right.
On that way. Let's say, as a writer, we've got the topic, we've done the research, we know it's going to be a book. How do you do the next step? How do you know who to submit it to?
That is a challenge. It depends. Well, it's a challenge because, as you know, I got into the writing thing just as the entire publishing world went through big changes. And 20 years ago, you probably didn't need an agent, especially for nonfiction. I don't know that that's the case anymore. There are so many houses that you can't get into if you don't have an agent. Right. Now, in terms of your own, you need to be aware. You look at your writer's markets guides. Go to the library, go to the bookstore. Pull out the books that are like the ones you're writing and the ones that you like. Who's that publisher? Who's putting that out there? If I have things that are related to Texas. So I'm always trying to find who's publishing. There's Pelican, but who else besides Pelican is publishing regional things that pertain to Texas? I'm still a little miffed that the larger publishers don't understand the size and the draw of the Texas thing, but that's a personal problem, so I won't bore you with that. But I have to look for who's going to. I have a book that I'm still looking to sell about crawfish. I'm from Southeast Texas originally, right across the river from Louisiana. I grew up in a Cajun culture. I know how to pronounce most of the Cajun names, the Boudreaux and the Thibodeaux and the Quibideaux and all that stuff. Crawfish were part of the culture that I grew up in. Some people think of them as bait, and some people think of them as lunch. And it kind of depends on where you're from. But they're becoming more common in menus across the country. So I did this kind of all things crawfish, not just crawfish, but crawfish culture, because there really is one, and Cajun culture and how all this came about. I did this book about that, and I'm still looking for, and I think it's going to have to go to an agricultural market. So what I'm going to have to do is find those people who are producing agricultural type books and then give those names. And I've done that with my agent. I've given him a couple of names, but I obviously haven't given him enough of them because he hasn't sold that one yet. But you have to look at your market guides, but also look at what's in the stores, who's publishing that is similar to what you're writing.
Yeah, and then Ruth added, check with your teacher friends too, because they would have a variety of favorite publishers and
school librarian, more so than your teachers. Yes, especially if they are, I don't know, some teachers they're not tuned in to who's publishing. I guarantee you that school librarian is. She knows who her favorite publishers are. She knows who's that's another good resource. Kind of like that research librarian, that school librarian is also a really good source for you to know who's publishing what and what the kids like. That's something else. You know, we live in a day and age of stalking kids to find out what they like. You could get in trouble, but you can't go to find out your local school librarians are. You can have nice chat about what are the kids in school, what do they take to work. I'm going to tell you right now, it's nonfiction though. They're going to tell you.
That's the need, the biggest need, isn't it? On that. Wow. Hey, listen, I'm wondering, because we're going to pretty soon bring everybody back on, but I'm wondering if you could give us maybe some inside tips. What do you see as trends in children's nonfiction?
I hesitate to do that because by the time you've noticed it, it's probably almost over. Mm-hmm. I think biographies are kind of big right now, and one of the members of my group is Nancy Chernin, and she's almost cornered the market. Her latest was Martin and Anne. She did sort of a parallel thing on Anne Frank and Martin Luther King would have both been 90 this year. And wow. So she did a kind of a parallel of how they both set out to, they never met, how they both set out to change the world in their own way. She's done, she got started with, she had done an interview. She used to work for a major newspaper in Texas, and she had an interview that had something to do with a deaf baseball player. His name was William Hoy. And the people that she was doing the interview with asked her to write a book about this person because they wanted to get his name out there, and they wanted for people to know. For example, William Hoy was the one who kind of invented baseball signals because he was a deaf player. And so she wrote that first book, and she's kind of gotten really good at doing biographies of people. And I think that anytime you take a fresh look at a well-known historical event, or find someone who is an unsung hero, or an event that is not well known, in terms of nonfiction, that those are all good bets. And you have to look and see, you think nobody's ever done this, and then you do a search and you find out, yeah, somebody's done this. But that's okay, because your voice is different, and you may bring a different slant to that story. But you need to be aware of what's already out there.
Yeah. So, and you gave a great little tip hidden in there about anniversaries. Look up. But you can't look like in 2020 now, because there wouldn't be time to get the book.
No, you need to be looking somewhere down the road. Yes.
Yeah, an article maybe a year out, but yet you need to look. We should be looking at 23, 24, 25. What's going to be key in those years?
Yeah. But for me personally, it's what piques my interest, or a lot of times I think about, as a former teacher, I think about what might dovetail with school curriculum. I tend to think in terms of, our kids studying that in school, or is that a first grade objective, or a third grade objective, or a sixth grade objective, or whatever. So another good thing for you to do is to take a look at your state guidelines. What is required for students at each grade level? If you're interested in science, then look up the science guidelines. If you're interested in history, look up the history guidelines. For example, in the state of Texas, Texas history and Texas themes are taught at the kindergarten level, at the fourth grade level, at the seventh grade level. There is an entire year of Texas history at seventh grade. There's another year, the whole fourth grade year is Texas. And then they get it in kindergarten too. That's why Texans are obnoxious. We know, we our kids have gotten all that throughout school, and I'm not proud of it. So,
well, all of us were from many different states here. I bet we could find that out, and I imagine they update those pretty regular. I probably by division will update science one year, maybe in history another year on the state level, because that stuff moves a little slow sometimes from my.
Yeah, it does. I don't think you're going to see any changes like every year, but you do have curriculum changes. But those curriculum guidelines are available online for anyone who, you know, you don't have to have any kind of special access. The curriculum should be available for anyone to see.
That is great. Well, why don't we, Bethany or Jan, do you have any last minute questions before we invite people back on? Okay, I'm seeing heads. So why don't everybody come on back in, and we'll have a little bit of a roundtable discussion in about the 5 minutes or so we have left, and see if you guys have any questions you want to ask. Several people have had to leave here at the last minute, but on that.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll be honest, I didn't know I was the guest. I guess it's a good thing that I can talk off the top of my head. I didn't know. I just thought I was one of the.
Well, you did great. You did great. Good stuff. Anybody have some questions that you want to pick her brain? This is the good time to pick her brain on children's books or nonfiction or researching. Question? Go ahead and just pop in.
Wendy, my video has me in jail, but that's a much better picture than I look like today anyway. Oh, start my video. Well, there I am. Okay. So what about recipes? Would that be considered nonfiction? I've been doing a lot of research in medieval times.
Okay.
I've come across some recipes for some foods that are unusual to our time, but were very common for them.
I would consider that nonfiction. And I think if you you ask your school librarian, you'll find that recipe books are in according to the Dewey Decimal System. So that would be nonfiction. You could also intersperse those recipes with some little backstory here and there. So if you had like a situation where you had a recipe and then you had like a little story that told something about it or whatever, that's definitely nonfiction. Yeah.
Well, I learned that King Henry VIII, his favorite was something called aleberry pudding. And they made a bread pudding and soaked it in ale. And that was his favorite bedtime treat. So if you were to say, you know, everybody sees him with a turkey leg, but if you were to say that and then give them, you know, a recipe to make it, I wondered if that would be a way I could use some of my research.
Maybe
Yeah.
not.
I think there's I can well, and as a matter of fact, Michelle Adams did a book on persimmons for Indiana Press recently, which is kind of a similar idea. The idea was to have lots of persimmon recipes and some little anecdotes and stories and things that go with it. I can certainly see something like that. You know, it's primarily recipes, but it's got a few stories and some backstory, and that I can definitely see that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely is not.
Maybe do it as a companion book, so you get 2 books.
A companion to something else she's writing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Think in terms of, for example, are you familiar with the Treehouse series for children? They're beginning chapter books, kind of, and they solve a mystery and it's a magic treehouse kind of thing. But for most of those titles, there is a separate title that is straight nonfiction that tells a lot about the science or the history or the whatever that's connected with that particular topic. Yeah, there are things like that.
That's great. Well, okay, we have probably time for at least one more question. Anybody want to speak up? Our group?
I've been thinking, well, I'm finishing my current project about doing something called Birmingham Where the Fae Don't Play. And it's taking the history of Birmingham, which is Iron City, Magic City, Iron, and just combining that with mythology about different fairy things. And so if you wanted to take history and you wanted to combine it with fiction stuff, does that, I'm thinking it would be a local interest because I'm from Birmingham right now. Does that stuff ever get outside of the local market, though?
It can. Now, when you're talking about blending fiction elements with, or not fiction elements, you still want to have fiction elements in your nonfiction, especially for picture books. But if any part of it is made up, then you're no longer talking about nonfiction. Now you're talking about fiction that has nonfiction elements in it. And they're called that informational fiction.
Yes.
They're starting to other things. You could start with their names, and it changes every week, is what I'm saying. It depends on who the big name is and what they're calling it. But in terms of, you could start with the regional press, but a lot of times if you can, excuse me, there are ways to get that. I'm not sure I heard everything. Remember, I'm out in the country on a hotspot. You said we're talking about what now? What is the main topic that goes with, you said Birmingham?
Yes, Birmingham, and it would be where the Fae don't play. And my premise is that with the art industry, it restricted the free motion of the fairy world. And as things are being replaced with PVC pipe and updating, they are being allowed more access or freedom where they had been restricted. So,
okay,
traditionally, fairies hate iron.
You have you got that one topic that might resonate in other areas, and the Birmingham thing is just kind of secondary. So I don't think that would keep that from having a wider appeal. If it's very specific to an area, though, then you're going to want to look at your regional publishers and see publishing things in your area. For example, as I said, things that I do that are related directly to Texas, then I'm looking for regional publishers who publish that sort of thing, or national publishers who just have niches. For example, Sleeping Bear Press does things that are very regional sometimes because they have some markets. They have tapped into these markets.
Well, Wendy, you have been a wealth of information today. I think we've all heard some tips. I got several things written down I'm going to connect to as soon as we get off the air here.
Well, I hope it was helpful. As I said, I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that you did get something that you can.
Very helpful. While we still have the recording going, I just want to be sure that we say what next week's topic and guest will be. We're going to be joined by Stephanie Jones. Is it Jones? Is that her last name? Bethany, got that down right? And she's going to talk about the writer as speaker. Ooh, so we'll see how that goes next month. I think it'll be great. And Wendy, what we usually do is when we stop the recording, we invite everybody to stay on for a few minutes after the recording, and we do a little bit of sharing. So I invite you to stay with us and stuff. Bethany, Jan, thank you for co-hosting today. Johnny, and for being in the background on that. Anything else, Bethany, you want to add while we're still recording?
I did want to let people know to make sure they check out Wendy's classes on nonfiction and the research. They're full of information, and we are still in our birthday sale. So this will be the week to buy them, 26% off with the coupon Happy B-Day 26 for Serious Writer just turned 2. So if you want those classes, I recommend jumping on them. They are fantastic.
Yeah. I bought some this week, so I know that. So thank you again, Wendy. And Johnny, we'll let you handle the recording, and we'll see everybody next week. Bye now.
Bye now.